Hello friends, my name is JJ, and I am sorry to say that it is a bit of a sad day for the channel. As you might be able to hear from the echoey sound of my voice, I'm in the process of packing up and moving to a different apartment, and unfortunately that will entail having to disassemble this iconic set that has been the backdrop of my channel for the last 4.5 years. This is actually the very last thing I have to pack up because it is so emotional for me. You know, these trinkets and baubles have become very iconic as part of the brand identity of my channel, and thus very much part of my own personal identity as well. And even though I am excited by the prospect of building a new set in my new apartment, obviously times of change and transition are always difficult. And so I thought that this would be a good opportunity for me to do something that has been quite long requested and tell you guys a little bit to boot all of the various things on the shelves. This video is going to be somewhat long and rambly, so it's kind of for hardcore JJ fans only, but don't worry, there's a normal video coming soon. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up my phone here as well, so I can give you guys some close-up shots of the various things as I take them down one at a time, before I systematically pack them up and put them into this charming Farm Boy bag I got in Ottawa. Farm Boy, a local Ontario supermarket brand I became quite fond of. I like their weird little goblin boy logo. So anyway, let's get started. So, talking of Ottawa, this little fellow here, this little guy, is the mascot of the Bank of Canada Museum. I initially thought he was the mascot of the Bank of Canada proper, but no, he is just the mascot of the Bank of Canada Museum specifically. I asked the folks at the museum what he represents. They said he represents nothing other than the fact that the museum needed a mascot. This is probably one of the more expensive trinkets that I own. It is a designer vinyl toy of the Hindu god Ganesh, made by an artisanal vinyl toy maker in Thailand. Thailand, for some reason, has quite a vibrant industry of vinyl toy making. This was one of these things that I had to be sort of first in line for the exclusive drop. I had to get up at like 3 a.m. or something just to place my order. But I thought it was really cool, and I really wanted something to reflect Indian culture in my backdrop. Ganesh is obviously one of the very iconic figures in Hindu spirituality, so I thought that this was a nice representation of that. This is, of course, a traditional Russian nesting doll. I forget what they're called. They're not called babushka dolls. They're called something like that. I just bought this at a thrift store here in Vancouver, so it's not special or particularly authentic, and it's in fact not even a true doll. It is instead of having smaller dolls inside of it, it just has a container of vodka. It was already empty when I bought it, so don't worry. Vodka bottle, Russia. You know, I sort of liked the symbolism of that. This is something I bought relatively recently. This I bought earlier this year when I was in Washington, D.C. As you can see, it is a sort of rubber duck statue of the iconic Rosie the Riveter poster by Norman Rockwell, a very famous poster from the Second World War. Novelty rubber ducks have become a increasingly popular thing. And in fact, talking of novelty rubber ducks, I also have these two novelty rubber ducks. Canubus, my YouTuber friend, whose channel you might have seen, when he was in Germany a few months ago, he bought these for me. And they are rubber ducks in the shape of the German crossing signals, you know, walk and don't walk. In Germany, they are done in the shape of these little guys with little hats. And this is something that is very sentimentalized in German culture. So I was very pleased to get these. This I just bought in Ottawa as well. This is an upik, which is a sealskin owl, traditional sort of handicraft of the native people of Canada's north, a very sort of famous, recognizable, iconic thing. They became a sort of fad in the 1970s, you know. People like to have these in their living rooms as decorations. You can sort of see how it kind of has a bit of a sort of 70s kind of kitschy aesthetic to it. This is something I bought recently just at a high-end French children's, sort of baby store. It is I didn't know what it was at first, and so I sort of crowdsourced an explanation, but it is a Napoleon, which is a type of French pastry. So thought that was kind of apropos. This is a vinyl Buddha statue. The necklace around it is one that one of my viewers sent me from Hawaii. I think it's a traditional Hawaiian necklace of some sort. It's made of nuts. I'm sorry, I don't really remember the full story behind it. Yeah, the Buddha vinyl statue I bought when I was in college. I think at like the college bookstore, they were having a thrift sale or something. It was something that was very cheap, but I thought was very cool because I wanted to have sort of symbols of the great religions in my backdrop, and this I think is a fun sort of symbol of Buddhism. This guy, I guess, is a Buddha as well. I don't remember where I got this. I think I got it at just a thrift store, but you know, it's the other style of Buddha, so I felt like should have one of those as well. This was sent to me by a viewer. This is a cheese hat statue from Wisconsin. The big Wisconsin football team is the Green Bay Packers. They have a very distinct culture, probably the most distinct culture in the NFL as far as fan cultures go. And one of the symbols of that distinctive fan culture is wearing these cheese hats. This is a very small one. I guess it's for a child or a dog or something, but you know, because Wisconsin is, of course, the great dairy state of America, and this was sort of one way that they've kind of embraced that identity. This thing is just, I don't remember what this is called, but this is like a very sort of like iconic mid-century American toy. I like it not just because it's a sort of iconic mid-century American toy, but because the great PC game, Sam & Max Hit the Road, this is the symbol of using something. Like it's a point and click game, you know, pick up, open, whatever. Use for the visual interface depicts a hand squeezing one of these things. And I kind of thought that was pretty clever and sort of reflected the iconic status of this particular toy. And it kind of made me want to have one of my own. This is a Campbell soup can done in the style of Andy Warhol, one of the great American artists of the 20th century. The Campbell soup people have very much embraced the fact that Andy Warhol, of course, made many depictions of Campbell soup in his career. And so they had it was for the 60-year anniversary of the original Warhol painting. They came up with cans of soup in his style. These are two little toys that I bought when I was in Sweden some years ago. Sort of fancy folk art horse and this little doll of this little character. The doll's name is Alphonse, I forget what his last name is, but he has like a first name and a last name. And he's like a very iconic children's book character. I think there was an animated show. Very Swedish, like it's very, very chill. It's about him and his single father. You know, the mother is not in the picture for reasons that are never explained. And he just sort of lives alone with his dad. And they just have like very boring, just very ordinary adventures. You know, they go to the park, they make dinner together, and it's very slow paced and mellow. And Swedish people love it. I actually used to have a little picture of him in my wallet when I was in Sweden, and I would just show it when I was making conversation with random Swedes. I would be like, do you know who this character is? And they'd be like, oh, it's Alphonse. Oh, I loved his books and his cartoon growing up. And oh, those stories are so nice and so calming. And, you know, so very... It's always good, I find, that when you travel, to really fixate on something that is very particular and very sentimentalized in the culture, but also somewhat obscure. So like in the sense like it's not a mainstream kind of tourist thing. Because I find that foreigners are most excited to talk about something that is a little off the beaten path, because their memories and their feelings of it will probably be more sort of sincere than if you ask them their opinion on some big famous tourist thing. And they will also appreciate a foreigner who has made the effort to learn about something a little bit more obscure. This is a much more sort of cliche kind of thing. This is just a very sort of traditional piece of Swedish folk art. These red painted wood sculptures of ponies. Not as much to sort of say about that. Every tourist shop in Sweden will reliably sell those. These I bought when I was in Toronto. I thought that they were kind of cool. I bought these at the big Toronto comic show, or Comic-Con, or whatever it's called. Very much one of the biggest comic shows in North America. Anyway, this woman was crocheting various things, and she crocheted these two things, which are supposedly the two vaccines for COVID-19. What is it, Pfizer and Moderna? I can't remember which one is which, but I wanted to have a good souvenir of the COVID era, and I thought that that was kind of fun. Remember how exciting it was when the vaccines were first unveiled. This is, of course, a character that I made myself, the Nanaimo Bear, who is sort of the mascot of the book that I released earlier this year, Canadamon, which explains Canada in 151 distinct monsters. The book is sold out, so unfortunately you can't get a copy if you didn't buy one already, but I am hoping to do a second print. And this is also sold out. This was a doll that I sold through Makeship, which I'm sure you might be familiar with, is the big company that YouTubers use to make plush dolls of their various characters and things. Vancouver-based company, in fact. The fellow who's the president of it, Pablo, is a friend of mine. Got a couple Nintendo-themed things here. I love Nintendo. I love classic Nintendo. I don't play a lot of video games these days, but its classic characters are pretty important to me. So I used to be a subscriber of Nintendo Power. Nintendo Power magazine came out with a merchandise catalog, and you could mail away for kind of exclusive toys that were only available through the Nintendo Power catalog. One of them was this little Donkey Kong doll, which I thought was kind of cool. This is just a amiibo of Ness, the character from Smash Brothers, and before that from Earthbound. Earthbound is a game that I was very fond of. I made a whole somewhat controversial video expressing my feelings on Earthbound, which is this sort of sleeper hit, cult classic, Super Nintendo game. I was very fond of at the time, but I have sort of more nuanced feelings on how it stands up as a cultural work. Actually have a boxed copy. It's not a boxed copy, it's just the box. This is the original box that Earthbound came in. I sold the cartridge many years ago on eBay, but the box is itself very valuable. These things can sell for over $1,000 on the secondhand market. And that's because Earthbound, despite being a relatively sort of not terribly well-received game when it was released, has become this hugely sort of sentimentalized property in the subsequent decades. And so much so that it's very sought by collectors, and even things like the box that it came in are very sought by collectors. So I believe in the apartment tour video I made for my friend Adam J. Bell some months ago, I identified this as possibly the most expensive thing that I have in my apartment that's not electronic in some way. So this is actually a very important sort of antique, I guess you would say, that I own, so I'm going to have to treat this carefully. Talking of Nintendo, this is a 3D printed version of the Nintendo 64 logo. My friend Bryn printed this for me. He has a 3D printer over in Alberta. I was visiting him and the family, and he was like, "Oh, you got to 3D print something. What would you like me to 3D print for you?" And I was like, how about one of these? I want to get it painted at some point, but I am not very skilled when it comes to painting, so I'll have to find somebody who is to do that for me. This little thing, I got this in Mexico. So this is the baby Jesus, and in Mexico, I think it's for Christmas. Must be for Christmas, that they have some tradition where you have a special cake, a Christmas cake, and somewhere within the cake, there is a little plastic Christ child. And if you get the piece of cake with the Christ child in it, I don't know, you get an extra present or something. I just thought that was kind of a fun tradition. And so this was 15 years ago I was in Mexico, but I obtained one. These are just little Mario characters made of Lego, the Fuzzy and the Toady. There's nothing particularly fancy about this. It's just, I thought they were kind of cool, so I bought it at the drugstore. This is a little sort of mini Funko of the Monopoly Man. I did a video not too long ago where I talked about the history of various iconic American toys, and the Monopoly Man was a prop in that. I get a fair number of questions about this. So this is a portrait of Robotnik, of Dr. Eggman, from the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise. In Sonic the Hedgehog, in the original games, Robotnik is this sort of dictator who has kind of taken over the world, and he has put up his portrait everywhere, and part of what Sonic does is takes down the portraits, and I think puts up his own portrait, which is a weird. But people often ask me where I got it from, and the truth is I just made it myself. I think that sometimes it is fun to make physical versions of things that sort of only exist in the digital realm, and this was one such thing that I made. This is a can of Vegemite, the beloved Australian food stuff. I was on a date many years ago with an Australian guy, and he was, trying to impress me, and he brought me a bunch of Australian snacks and things, including a Vegemite jar, which I thought was pretty charming. These are two Funko Pops. I'm a big fan of Funko Pops, much to the disgust of my young friend Greg, who often teases me about this. But these are two Funkos that are just from sort of iconic American mid-century brands. The Hawaiian Punch mascot, and then the White Castle mascot. I like Funkos, but I like to think I'm a somewhat discriminating Funko shopper. I tend to only buy ones that, I think represent something of cultural significance, not just some random pop culture character. This is a Jizu statue I bought when I was in Japan. It is, I believe it's a sort of vaguely Buddhist thing. A lot of Japanese culture is a kind of, sort of vague hybrid of Buddhist influences, Shinto influences, sort of traditional, so I guess we would sort of paganistic kind of folklore stuff, and it's all been kind of become this sort of distinctive Japanese hybrid culture. So I'm not actually sure what the specific roots of this is. But in modern day Japan, these sorts of statues are often seen in public places. They put, people like crochet or knit these little red scarves around their neck. I've been told that they can represent different things to different people. One common thing is that they represent like the idea of a traveler and like a safe journey for a traveler. And so that is sort of the symbolism that I bought mine on the basis of, like a sort of guardian for when you're going off on trips, as I often do. You want to have somebody looking over you and protecting you. And that's what mine represents. I've heard that there's actually like a very dark symbolism of them as well, is that they can represent the spirit of dead children, or like people that have lost a child and that sort of thing. So seem like two very different sort of symbolic purposes, but I choose to have mine represent the somewhat more innocuous meaning. This is of course a 1-Up from Mega Man, made of those melty bead things. Does it feel like I have a lot of video game stuff? I don't think of myself as like a big gamer type, but some of those 90s, 80s video games, very much part of my childhood, and I like to sentimentalize them, even though I'm not so big into modern gaming. I bought this when I was in Chile in 2020. This is of course the iconic head statues from Easter Island, which is part of Chile. Going to Easter Island is very difficult. It's a really involved trip to get there from the Chilean mainland, from Santiago. So I never went there myself, but nevertheless, Chilean tourist shops are very full of Easter Island memorabilia. So I've always liked these statues. I mean, obviously it's one of the most sort of iconic, I don't know what you would call it, sort of pieces of indigenous art in the world. And no trip to Chile would be complete without one. Mine kind of got a little bit busted in the suitcase, so I had to glue it back together, but hopefully that's not obvious. This is a totem pole bank that says Canada on it. It looks very old, probably sort of mid-century. It's very obviously not authentic. It's clearly not made by an indigenous artist, I would think. It looks like it's kind of a white person's understanding of what a traditional Pacific Northwest totem pole of the sort that we have here in British Columbia would be. Which I guess makes it somewhat problematic. It's a kind of a piece of cultural appropriation, or sort of cultural ignorance, exoticism, I suppose you would say. But, that is part of the culture of this country. It's part of the legacy of this country, is sort of misappropriating and misunderstanding indigenous cultures and indigenous art. So I don't know if it's kind of owning it is not a moral statement. I just think it's an interesting artifact of a certain reality of Canadian society and culture. This is a pickle, like a Christmas pickle rock. It's a pickle, Morty. This is, I believe, a German Christmas custom of some sort. Any Germans can let me know in the comments what the full story is. I don't remember. And I also don't really remember the context in which I got this. These little guys are Christmas ornaments that one of my viewers sent me. They are also made of the melty plastic beads. You can see them. So these are what they call mummers, which is a sort of Atlantic Canadian Christmas tradition, sort of like Halloween, but basically, as you can sort of see, people wear these kind of cloths over their face with eye holes, and then they kind of wear crazy mismatched clothing, and then they go door to door and play music, Christmas carols and stuff for locals. And the idea is that they're your neighbors who you see the rest of the year, but once a year at Christmas time they dress up in disguise, and it's like, who was that? Was that Barry from down the street, or who was it? And like the mystery and sort of the kind of the wackiness of that is part of the attraction to it. It's very sentimentalized part of sort of Atlantic Canadian culture. I think they kind of look a bit like the Homestar Runner. This is some garland done up in the style of the Danish flag of Denmark. I talked about this in one of my videos on flag culture. So in Denmark and in Scandinavia, they have a very different relationship with their flag than we do in many other Western countries. Certainly different than what we have in North America, where it's like they see the flag as less of a patriotic thing and more of just a generic decoration kind of thing. So like putting the flags up on the Christmas tree or putting the flags just like as decorations for your birthday party, like that's not seen as a sort of political act in the way that I think if you put the stars and stripes on your Christmas tree, that would be seen as a little, I think, tacky in American culture. Not so in Scandinavian culture. Yet another gamer icon. This is the piñata from Fortnite. I have never played Fortnite. That is a game that has sort of passed me by culturally. But I understand that it is probably one of the more significant, culturally significant games that has arisen in the last couple of decades, and I wanted an artifact to remember it. And I also just like piñatas. I think piñatas are an interesting cultural object. So I thought that the confluence of this iconic game and then this sort of just broader iconic symbol, because I do think that like this is kind of like the platonic ideal of a piñata. This kind of llama-shaped, multicolored, frilly sort of thing. This is obviously a Vancouver license plate, a license plate from British Columbia. In British Columbia, we have two different styles of license plate. I'm sure it's similar where you live. You can get the sort of the default boring license plate, or you can get like a vanity license plate where you can get it to say whatever you want. And this is what the vanity license plates look like. They're done in this kind of distinctive white, green, and blue style. Talking of Vancouver, this is another very sort of iconic Vancouver thing. This is the East Van Cross, which is basically just a symbol of Vancouver. East Vancouver, I guess specifically. East Vancouver is it's kind of a complex part of Vancouver. It has a lot of real rundown areas, a lot of homeless people. But like many, I think, areas of that sort in cities is also becoming very gentrified. And so it's kind of becoming sentimentalized in various ways that are both maybe ironic and non-ironic and post-ironic. And the East Van Cross is, I think, in many ways becoming a kind of symbol of the complex identity of that particular part of the city. There actually is a formal, erected monument to the cross. And the cross, I don't know, I've heard conflicting stories of where it comes from originally, like if it was a sort of like a graffiti tag or something that people used to carve into the wall. From what I understand though, there's no Christian symbolism to it. It's just this kind of symbolic thing. And somebody got it tattooed on their forehead. Hot dogs is what it said. It was just a prank. They didn't actually get the tattoo. And some people were like offended because they were sort of saying like, you know, you're making fun of this symbol that's very important to Vancouverites and treating it in this kind of frivolous, non-reverential way. This was sent to me by a viewer. I really like this. This is the mascot of a theme park in Atlantic City in New Jersey. I cannot remember the name of the theme park now, but it's a sort of, I think, somewhat kind of hokey, cheesy theme park, and you know, the logo is obviously a little grotesque, but people sort of lean into it, and for that very reason, you know, it's kitschy, and people like the kitschy aspect of it. People like how sort of weirded out they are by this thing that maybe they remember sort of seeing when they would go to this theme park with their families when they were kids. This is just a postcard of Canada. I got this in Toronto. It's an old retro postcard. It's a recreation. It's not actually an antique, but it says Dominion of Canada on it, and it has sort of the old Canadian coat of arms. So just kind of an interesting little retro thing. I have some other postcards here as well that you can see. These are postcards of Loteria, which is the Mexican bingo that you may be familiar with. The art on the Mexican bingo cards are very, very famous, very sentimentalized in Mexican culture. I did a video where I talked about this to some degree. This is yet another gamer thing. This is, I believe this is the Dragon Lord from Final Fantasy, from Dragon Warrior. Dragon Warrior 1, I believe this is the final boss of that game. It was a game I liked as a kid. You got a free copy of Dragon Warrior 1 if you subscribed to Nintendo Power magazine back in the day. That seemed like a remarkably generous giveaway at the time, when video games were very expensive and you were not generally in the habit of receiving them for free. So, as a result, I think a lot of kids that otherwise wouldn't be into role-playing games, you know, kind of really gritted their teeth and struggled through Dragon Warrior 1 just because, you know, it was free. So that was enough of a draw. This is a little Year of the Tiger sort of statue for the Chinese New Year. Kind of cute. He's, of course, holding an LGBT pride flag, which is a symbol that I have been made more peace with in recent years than I previously had. Have a whole video about that. I like to buy a little doll of the year, sort of the Lunar New Year every year, and it's changes in my backdrop. I don't know if many people have noticed that, but yeah. So I guess Year of the Tiger is coming to a close, and now it's the Year of the Ox. Is that right? Hey, okay, Google, what is the Chinese New Year animal for 2023?
Year of the Rabbit.
The rabbit. Oh, I was way off. Little Among Us guy. I wanted to get some sort of Among Us thing. That strikes me as a game that has made a sort of lasting cultural impact that people will probably be remembering and sentimentalizing for many, many, many years to come. This is pink candy popcorn. I don't know what this is. The package seemed kind of cool to me. Is this famous? Is this iconic? I don't know. I don't even remember where I bought this, but it struck me as having a sort of interesting kind of mid-century design, and so I wanted it, and now I have it. This is another version of my Canadamon character, of my Nanaimo Bear guy, mascot of my Canadamon franchise. A viewer made this for me. He crocheted it for me and then gave it to me in person here in Vancouver. So that was very nice of him. Very cool piece of art. These little guys here, you can see them, they're sort of in a row. They're kind of hard to move because they're made of many pieces. They're, I don't know, these just kind of like designer toys. My sister bought these for me for my birthday. Each one of them is themed as a different sort of traditional cuisine of the world. This is Dutch, so it's like Holland cheese. This is like a French baguette man. This is like an Indian curry man. This is like a Chinese soup dumpling man. You can see he has a straw sticking out of his dumpling head. And then this one is an okonomiyaki. Takoyaki. This is like a takoyaki octopus ball thing from Japan. And speaking of takoyaki, this is a good excuse to talk about perhaps what I like to think is the most iconic thing in my backdrop, which is this, which is a takoyaki banner I bought in Japan. Takoyaki, yeah, is, like I said, it's this kind of deep fried octopus ball food that they eat over there. It's kind of it's very like a street food. I feel like it's very much associated with festivals, you know, in the summertime. And this is a very common sort of poster, sort of generic sign that you see used to advertise when the octopus balls are for sale. So I just bought this at a dollar store, but I just really like the design of it. It's very generic, it's very public domain. And so as a result, I made a t-shirt of it as well that you can purchase if you so desire. I kind of wanted this to be like the brand identity of my channel. I don't know if it's really fully caught on as far as that goes, but I will definitely continue to display it prominently in my new setup, in my new studio. I get a lot of comments on this as well. This is, so this is an interesting thing. This is an original piece of art. This is like hand painted by a Vancouver artist that I bought at some sort of Vancouver art show. It is, I didn't fully understand all of the symbolism of it at the time. It's based on a character from Animal Crossing, the Nintendo game, the little raccoon fellow who sells you stuff. And I mean, it's obviously done in a kind of subversive sort of way. And I didn't quite get the symbolism of it when I bought it. Somebody has since explained it to me, is that he's supposed to be a kind of stereotypical Antifa kind of character. So you can see he has little, like the anarchist symbols in his ears, and you know, he's wearing kind of like a punk sort of outfit. And he has this soup can, and apparently like, there's something about Antifa and soup. I can't even quite remember. I don't remember if it's like they throw soup cans or like they donate soup cans. On the soup can it says, soup for your family. So there's something about like, this maybe is like an Antifa sort of charity thing, like that they're giving food back to the community or something. I don't know. If you're more sort of well-versed in the symbology of Antifa, you can explain what this is all about to me. So maybe I'm just owning art in a sort of ignorant, politically ignorant capacity, but I don't know, I just thought it was kind of cool. I like the bright pink color. I thought that he would look good on my wall. That's rich, conservative JJ buying a sort of subversive left-wing art that he doesn't quite understand, only for the aesthetics. This is a original Atari Pac-Man cartridge. There's not much to say about that. Important piece of video game history, I suppose. And this is, of course, a Pac-Man lamp, which is not actually mine. I'm borrowing it from my friend, Sam Logan, famous web cartoonist. It actually can turn on. Does the batteries still work, or is it long dead? I don't know. It can light up, but and cycle through the different colors. I guess it could at one time, but yeah, I used this as a prop in my rather unexpectedly successful video about the symbolism of the ghosts in Pac-Man and whether or not they actually are supposed to be ghosts, which, if you will watch the video, you will learn is a surprisingly contentious matter. This I got from my grandmother. Well, you know, near the end, Grandma was a little out of it, and we were putting her into various nursing homes. And if you've ever gone through that experience, it's you know, it's not exactly a barrel of laughs. You have to spend a lot of time going through, you know, your elderly family member's apartment, and you know, basically throwing out a lot of stuff that they no longer have the capacity to use or appreciate or anything. So when I was doing that with my father, when we first moved Grandma into one of the nursing homes that she would spend the rest of her life in, you know, I was kind of looking through for anything that wasn't dump worthy. And one of the things was this plaque that my grandfather had, I suppose, purchased at some point in his life. And supposedly this is like the McCullough family crest. you know, this is a big racket, you know, family crests, like there is no recognized authority, official. There's no like, you know, no official McCulloch chieftain who proclaims what is or isn't your official family crest and, you know, selling these things. Like I could go all over Scotland and, you know, I'm sure see 16 different versions of what the official McCulloch family crest is supposed to be. But, you know, this is one that my grandfather bought, I suppose, probably sincerely believing that this was the crest of our clan or whatever. And I don't know, I just kind of thought it was fun, even though I don't take this kind of stuff very seriously. It was something that mattered to my late grandfather, and so it is a way I guess I can remember him. I wasn't super close to Grandpa. He died when I was relatively young, when I was like, I don't know, 12 or so. But he did care a lot about our heritage, as I think grandpas of that generation tend to. We are of sort of Scotch-Irish heritage, the McCulloch family name. So I guess the descendant of like Scottish people that moved to Northern Ireland. So like Scottish Protestants in the north of Ireland is sort of where the McCulloch name comes from. But, you know, I mean, that is a very small sliver of my identity because, you know, my mother's side is more diverse and, you know, my grandmother's side is more diverse. My dad's mother is, you know, Italian and British and things like that. So I don't really identify as a Scots or a Scots-Irish or anything like that, but, you know, Grandpa McCulloch did. This is a tanuki. Another Japanese thing that I bought when I was in Japan. I had to get this shipped over. I remember when I left Japan, I shipped it in a big packing crate. It was very expensive because it's made of ceramic, so it's very delicate. But you might have seen one of these things before, which is another sort of very famous Japanese kind of ceramic sculpture, traditional sort of folk art kind of thing. And I'm sure you've seen these in Asian restaurants of all sorts. And this, the tanuki statue, which is a sort of raccoon beast that is common in that part of the world, this is what they put in bars. So it's like, this is the good luck for a restaurant statue, this is a good luck for a bar statue. And so I had to have the set. Talking of sculptures, this is a ceramic rooster sculpture, which is one of the very traditional folk art pieces from Portugal. I've never been to Portugal. I did not buy this there. I did not even buy this in Europe, but it's a good symbol of European culture and a good symbol of an important country in Europe, so I wanted to get it. So this is a piece of Japanese calligraphy I got when I was in that country. This is the sort of standard piece of paper that you draw calligraphy on in Japan. You know, they sell these little cardboard squares with the gold frame at the Japanese stationery store, and you know, calligraphy is sort of a kind of casual art that a lot of people dabble in. And one of the mothers, so when I was in Japan, I was an ESL teacher, and near the end of my stay there, a number of the mothers wanted to give me presents. You know, in Japan, they have a very big gift-giving culture in which you're constantly giving presents to even the most marginal people in your life. And one of the mothers wanted to make me calligraphy. You know, she fancied herself quite good at it. And she asked me what calligraphy character I wanted. And at the time, I was playing Final Fantasy IX on the PlayStation 2, because that was a game I always wanted to play, and I didn't enjoy that game at all, and it became a bit of a grueling slog, but I really was not happy in Japan, and I just kind of had to create sort of structures of discipline to just kind of keep me focused on the day-to-day and provide a sort of sense of purpose to the day-to-day. And one of the ways that I did that was by sort of playing through Final Fantasy IX, you know, maybe playing an hour every night before I went to bed. And in Final Fantasy IX, there is like a silence spell that you can cast, and when you cast the spell, this big Japanese character appears on the screen. And this is that character. It means something like silence or mute or something. So I asked the mother if she could make me a calligraphy of that sign, because that is something that, has some degree of relevance to me. Maybe the relevance isn't super deep, but, when I look at this calligraphy and I remember the story behind it, it evokes sort of strong memories of what that year of my life was like. So that's why I have this. This is a little Danish character. It's called I forget what the name is, but some Danish guy got it in his head that he wanted to make a iconic souvenir for the country. And I guess Denmark didn't have a good folk art thing like the Portuguese, rooster or the Japanese cat or whatever. So he got it in his mind, I'm going to make one of my own, and he invented this goofy thing. So if I recall correctly, one of my viewers from Denmark sent this to me. Speaking of Scandinavia, this is a sort of traditional folk art thing from Finland. A little sort of folk art doll. I think it's of the sort of the indigenous people of that part of the world, and this is their sort of traditional clothing. This is a little Jesus, a Jesus version of the Linux penguin. Linux, the operating system that was very hot when I was young. I was never a Linux user myself, but I don't know. I remember somebody online was selling the Linux penguin done up in all these different styles. This would have been in the late 90s or something. This was the very first thing I remember ordering online. And it's there's no significance. I'm not a big Christian or anything. This is a very Catholic depiction of Jesus, in fact, with the Sacred Heart. But I don't know, there's something about it that I just kind of thought was cool, and I just wanted to have it. This is a piggy bank that I bought in Chile. This is a good example of what I was talking about earlier in terms of, you fixate on something that is very beloved and sentimentalized to the locals, but they are not used to foreigners knowing or caring about. So I quickly sort of perceived that this style of piggy bank was something that was familiar to a lot of Chilean people that they had when they were children. And so I bought it at a used, as a thrift store in Chile, and I would show it to people, and they would always be very impressed that I knowed or cared about this weird Chilean thing. This is a sculpture that is quite special to me because it was made especially for me. It is a god from traditional Thai spirituality. One of the main gods of their sort of spiritual folklore. I'm sorry, I don't know the name of the character or a lot of the sort of story behind it, but you can see it. He's sort of done in a very traditional Thai style with traditional Thai crowns and all that. There's an artist, a Thai American artist in Texas, who does all sorts of wood sculptures for people. He's very sort of prolific on social media. And, mostly he does sculptures of, pop culture characters. He'll do Star Wars things and Pokemon and Rick and Morty and all that kind of thing. And I felt like I wanted to give him a more, a different sort of assignment. So I said, you're Thai. He's an immigrant from Thailand who came to America. I think that's an interesting story. And I was like, can you make me something that reflects your culture, something from Thai culture? And he made me this. And so it's really quite beautiful. And it's special to me because I haven't commissioned a lot of art in my day. Certainly not a lot of, woodworking or sculpture. So this one is it's a one-of-a-kind thing that was made just for me. It's very delicate, though. I don't know how I'm going to have to travel with the utmost care. Oh, there's a coin here. This is a $2 coin from Hong Kong. I guess somebody sent that to me at some point. This is a Funko Pop of Ike from South Park, the little Canadian baby. As a Canadian myself, I like pop culture depictions of Canadian things. So these are two Russian things. I can't remember the full story of this guy. A fan gave it to me at my recent fan meetup in Toronto. It's like a sculpture that was, I believe, done by a Russian artist. I hope it was Russian. I hope it wasn't Ukrainian. That would be taboo. I believe it was a Russian artist, and he made, or they made some of these little sculptures of this weird little guy sitting, waiting patiently. And this sculpture, the art was so popular that they made it into a sort of series of, little souvenir ones. And the way that it was described to me is that, like, you give it to somebody and it's like, what is this? It's like, oh, it's a little waiting guy. And it's like, what is he waiting for? Oh, he's waiting for a better present. So that's kind of fun. And this is another makeshift doll. This one was made by my friend Roman, your friendly neighborhood Russian. He makes videos about life in Russia. And this is a very sort of stereotypical depiction of a kind of like Russian lower middle class guy, a gopnik, I think what they're called. He's got like a booze bottle and he's wearing a tracksuit and he's got a black eye. Roman's videos, I would say, have become very essential watching in the aftermath of the still ongoing war in Ukraine. Roman is a sort of middle-class Russian, young man. He's in his early 20s, and he has fled that country because he views himself as having no future there. And I think he's probably not wrong to conclude that. And his stories about, life, having left Russia, he now lives in Georgia next door. It's very harrowing stuff, I watch his videos and my heart really goes out to him because he's living a very difficult life where he's really sort of torn between worlds. He really sort of feels adrift. What does it mean to be, a young Russian in the 21st century, someone who believes in liberalism and pluralism and democracy and so forth, but, also has an identity as a Russian that he's not necessarily eager to shed. I don't know. The videos are, like I said, like they're just essential watching because it's a firsthand account of what it's like to be a product of this very, controversial, very contentious, very oppressive, and I think very wicked society. But, he is a young man who is just kind of caught up in the middle of all of that. And the way he talks about his experiences in just very blunt, honest language, I think is just essential to watch as somebody in the privileged West, what it is like to imagine yourself going through that already very difficult phase of life in the shadow of all this kind of like geopolitical drama and, domestic oppression. This has a lot less sort of significance to it. This is just a little sculpture I bought of the sort of the Jack of Clubs guy. I made a video about playing card culture and playing card symbolism, and I think that the iconography of playing cards is one of the more important visual cultural symbols in the Western canon. This is a Funko Pop of Frankenstein. Frankenstein, of course, being one of the great American cultural monsters. I made a whole video about the American monster canon, which I wish was more successful. I put a lot of work into that video, and I like that video a lot. I think the monster canon and the stories behind how, Frankenstein, Mummy, Dracula became such beloved and sentimentalized figures in American folk culture is, I think, an interesting one. I sure have a lot of Japanese stuff, don't I? This is a very traditional Japanese wooden toy. I like this kind of stuff, old-fashioned toys. You take out this hammer in the head and you like smack the little colored pieces one at a time. It's kind of like Jenga because you try to smack out the bottom ones without toppling you smack out the bottom ones without toppling the whole tower. So you're trying to keep it together through mastery of gravity. This is a bobblehead of Chef Wasabi, who is a mascot of a local sushi restaurant here in Vancouver. This is a sculpture of Quachi, who was one of the mascots of Vancouver's 2010 Olympic Winter Games. This is a Chain Chomp from Mario, a G.I. Joe figurine, and another Among Us. This was a gift from my aforementioned friend, Sam Logan, the great web cartoonist. This is the soundtrack to Mother, which was the game that came before Earthbound that we talked about earlier. So Earthbound was Mother 2 for the Super Nintendo. Mother was Earthbound, 1, I guess, for the Nintendo Entertainment System. but it never came out in America. So this is the record soundtrack to this old NES game. It's a kind of cool thing to have. I'm feeling like a little bit of a weeb here based on how much Japanese stuff I have. You know, I lived in Japan for a year, and I've never been like a huge Japanese cultural fanboy type. But, I don't know, Japan has a very distinctive culture. You know, I made a video where I talked about this. And, I don't know, like Japanese folk art in particular, I just think is very compelling. It's very distinctive, and they know it's distinctive, and they sell a lot of it. So it really appeals to people like me that are real suckers for a good souvenir. I bought this at a Japanese umbrella store. So Japan, as you might know, has a culture of sort of traditional artisanal umbrella making. You know, these kind of very delicate paper umbrellas that sort of high society women used to use to guard their pale faces from the sun, and to some degree, high status women in Japan still do that. Protecting yourself from the sun is considered important for women who care about their appearance to do, because having a darker complexion is considered unattractive. Anyway, at the Japanese artisanal umbrella store, they were selling little souvenir umbrellas made of paper. And this one is of a Japanese umbrella monster. You can see it has the little weird, creepy face on it. Because the Japanese believe that if you mishandle your umbrellas in life, they will come back and haunt you after death. This is a salt and pepper shaker set I bought when I was in Montreal some time ago. They are done up in the style of parking cones. Montreal has quite a lot of road construction. It's probably one of the worst cities that I've ever been to in terms of just how much construction intrudes into daily life. And the Montrealers sentimentalize this a lot. I have since learned that a lot of cities actually do this. A lot of cities think that they have an above average degree of road construction, and sometimes even to the point of making things like parking cones one of their souvenir symbols. This is an old trope I've heard a lot, where it's just like, our official state bird is the parking cone. So, perhaps Montreal is not quite as creative when it comes to this sort of thing as I originally thought. But nevertheless, at the time, I was like, oh, how subversive and self-deprecating that they would make a salt and pepper shaker of parking cones. So, sucker that I am, I bought them. These are two Funko Pops from the iconic mid-century American board game Candyland. When I was a youngster in daycare, I remember playing Candyland a lot. The game is like conceptually idiotic. It's a complete game of chance. All you do is pick cards and move across the board. But the character design was very compelling. And this is one of the characters, Mr. Mint. It's like a candy cane man. And then this is the sort of the gingerbread man that you play as, the game piece. And I've always liked gingerbread men, as anybody who follows my Instagram will know. These are, two flags. The flag of Washington, D.C. and the flag of Maryland. Two places where I was earlier this year. I forgot to bring this up earlier, but this is a sandstone sculpture of a mummer. The mummers, the crazy costumed Christmas people from Eastern Canada that I mentioned earlier. This was bought for me by my friend Edward when he was in Newfoundland earlier this year. There's a little plush mummy to go with my Frankenstein as part of my American Monsters collection. This is a Mexican top I bought I believe I bought this in LA when I was there for VidCon a few years ago. They had this huge sort of Mexican flea market, and they were selling all sorts of random stuff. And I don't know what Mexican game this is for. It's like a Mexican dreidel, basically, but it struck me as something pretty distinctive and distinctly Mexican, so needed it for the old backdrop. This over here is one of the first, this is one of the first things that anybody from my audience ever sent to me. It is a sort of barn decoration from the Pennsylvania Dutch community. So, the Pennsylvania Dutch are people of German heritage who are pretty influential in the rural parts of that state. The Amish, I believe, are of Pennsylvania Dutch extraction. And, they have their own distinctive culture, and one aspect of their culture is decorating barns, and they have a very distinctive art style, and that's kind of what it looks like. And this is apparently one of the more kind of like iconic decorations, this kind of bird and flower sort of look. So something equivalent to this would be commonly seen on I don't know if it's on the exterior or interior of barns in rural Pennsylvania, but I like this a lot. This is another Earthbound themed thing. This is the Mr. Saturn, who's one of the iconic characters from the Earthbound game. I bought this in Japan. There's a part in the sequel to Earthbound, Mother 3, where there is a Mr. Saturn character who is like undercover, like pretending to be like an old woman, and he wears like a shawl like this. And so it came with a shawl because Earthbound Mother 3 was a relatively new game at that time, and so they had like merch of it. When I was a kid, Earthbound, despite being one of my favorite games, was like super obscure, and there was like no merchandise at all. So seeing like a doll of this character in Japan was like very exciting to me, because it's like, oh man, like, 13-year-old JJ would have been over the moon if he could have possibly seen such a thing. So 25-year-old JJ had to buy it. This is a very Canadian thing. So when much to my chagrin, Canada is an officially bilingual country. And sometimes when you are interacting with representatives of the state, of bureaucrats of various sorts, they will have this little thing on their desk, and it informs the public that they can speak French or English. So this is just a kind of very ordinary artifact of bureaucratic life in Canada, and it's the kind of thing I like to own. This is a doll of a jackalope, one of the great folkloric characters of American culture. A viewer sent this to me some time ago. I've always quite enjoyed it. This is a Beanie Baby, a duck. Jake the duck. Mallard ducks are pretty common where I live. As a kid, I used to really like them, was really fascinated by them. The duck is named Jake, which is also the name of my father, so that's kind of a sort of fun thing. My sister used to be quite a prolific collector of Beanie Babies. She, and to some extent my family as well, got very bound up in the Beanie Baby craze of the 90s, in which we accumulated like an enormous quantity of these things, assuming that they would be worth something someday, which of course they are not. So having this kind of reminds me of a number of different things about my family. I wish that I could tell this story a little bit better. So I got this in Germany when I was there many years ago. I was in Augsburg, Germany. I believe this was in Augsburg. It might have been in Munich. But there was some sort of communal housing that had been in operation for centuries, that had been set up by some sort of wealthy, aristocratic German family a long time ago. And, it was for people that were poor and needed a place to stay and so on and so forth. And the way that it worked was that you could stay there for, I don't know, as long as you wanted. And I think the rent was like extremely cheap or non-existent. But, the aristocratic family that initially set it up, they were sort of like very stern German Protestants. And in every room, they had like a list of like the moral precepts that you had to follow in order to stay there. I don't remember what they were. They were sort of, these kind of just sort of stern moralistic instructions, like, clean your room and no loud music and no drinking or dancing and, always treat others with respect and say your prayers and so forth. And every room also had a framed portrait of this guy, who I guess was the patriarch of the family. And by continuing to have these pictures in prominent display, you sort of remembered, your moral obligation to the founding families of this public project. And I don't know, because I'm a sort of stern and puritanical person myself, I kind of just thought that would be sort of a fun thing to have in my own apartment. These are Goombas, the bad guys from Mario Brothers. Mario Brothers 1 was the first game I remember playing as a child. It was when I first learned about the existence of Nintendo, in fact, was playing Super Mario Bros. 1 at Costco, or a Costco-like store. I remember being fascinated by the Goombas. I just remember thinking like that these were like remarkable, you know, cool, I don't know, compelling looking characters. And I've always had a real deep affection for Mario and the Mario world and the aesthetics of Mario character design and so forth. So this is a monument to that. Speaking of monuments to that, this is a Thwomp, which is another Mario character. This is made out of those melty beads. The Thwomp was another character I remember being quite taken by when I saw it for the first time. Mega Man, this is a light up statue. Does it still work? Oh yeah. Mega Man was another video game that I was very influenced by aesthetically. It's a framed picture of, sorry, things are a little dusty here. You might imagine that there's not a lot of dusting that goes on up there. I was a subscriber to Nintendo Power Magazine, as I think I explained, and they would send you free magazines at some point, and one of the free magazines that they sent me was a what they used to call like a player's guide or a strategy guide that was all about Super Mario World, which was the hot game of the early 90s when the Super Nintendo first came out. You know, I read that strategy guide inside and out. I read it obsessively. I read it every day, you know. I read it so much that it got completely dog-eared and was falling apart at the seams. And so eventually I did have to throw it out during a previous move, even though it was a very sort of sentimental object. And to remember it, I just framed one of the pages of it, this nice sort of like illustrative page that depicts Mario fighting King Bowser. And just to answer the inevitable question, yes, I am very excited for the upcoming Mario Brothers movie, which I think looks like is doing a good job to sort of capture the sort of the spirit of magic of the Mario world that so enchanted people of my generation, while also making it fun and relevant for a new generation of youngsters. This is a little Christmas tree ornament based around the CBC, the Canadian Public Broadcaster, which I do not care much for personally, but nevertheless a nice artifact of Canadiana. Somebody sent this to me. I apologize, I cannot quite remember who or in what context. This is a goblin, a recreation of a goblin that is on the artifice of the Canadian Parliament buildings in Ottawa. The Canadian Parliament buildings in Ottawa are being sort of neo-Gothic sculpture, and they have, you know, lots of little, you know, ornamentation all over the place, and including a lot of these little Gothic goblins, and this is just a recreation of one. I bought it when I was visiting the Parliament of Canada quite recently. A member of Parliament was nice enough to give me a tour of the chamber, and I purchased that at the gift shop while I was there. This is a Christmas ornament of a mid-century California home. I bought that when I was in Palm Springs. My parents, retirees that they are, they spend a lot of time in Palm Springs, and I went down to visit them recently. Didn't get to spend much time there because it was right at the outbreak of COVID, and so I immediately had to go back, but was there long enough to buy this little Christmas ornament. Mid-century architecture. I am realizing now that mid-century aesthetics are something that I'm more attracted to than I previously realized. This is very special to me because I believe this is the very first thing that a member of my audience ever sent to me. This is like an incense holder from Kuwait. And a viewer sent this to me from Kuwait. I remember I got it delivered to my parents' house, and my parents were kind of freaking out. Mail from the Middle East. I don't know about that, JJ. And but no, it's very cool. Yeah, it was the first time that I ever got any sort of trinkets or baubles from my audience, and obviously that would become a big sort of part of my channel branding, that people would send me crazy stuff and culturally significant stuff, and so I will always remember this particular artifact is sort of the beginning of what would become one of the sort of the defining trends of my channel. My friend Bryn bought this for me when he was visiting I believe one of the presidential libraries. Maybe it was the Harry S. Truman Presidential Library, because it says the buck stops here. And President Harry S. Truman famously had this sign on his desk, in the Oval Office, because the idea was, by the time something gets to the president's desk, well, it must be pretty important. So the buck stops with the president. So this is very, very local story behind this one. There is a chain of restaurants in Vancouver in British Columbia called White Spot. That name freaks out some people. I guess it's a little politically incorrect by today's standards, although it's not supposed to be racial in nature, it's just called White Spot. And I think it's a sort of family restaurant. I really like kind of middle class family restaurants. It's a kind of style of food and dining that I'm very fond of because I'm very basic. And anyway, in the lobby of these restaurants, they always have this framed portrait of the founder of the franchise, Mr. Nat Bailey, 1902 to 1978. And I don't know, I love those restaurants. I've been going to them ever since I was a kid. And when I was living briefly in Toronto, I was feeling a little bit nostalgic about my home. And so I wrote a letter to the White Spot people and I said, could I have one of those Nat Bailey founder pictures that you guys always have in your restaurant lobbies? I think that would be kind of a cool thing to have as a souvenir of my life in Vancouver. So I didn't wind up spending much time in Toronto ultimately, but they were nice enough to oblige. They sent me one and I brought it back here with me. And this is something that any Vancouver person immediately grasps the significance of when they see that I have one of these in my house. And speaking of portraits, this is, of course, a portrait of the late Queen Elizabeth II. You can see I put some black bunting on it, like a real official person does. I've seen the government of Canada has started doing this. I'm not a monarchist at all. I didn't support the monarchy when the Queen was alive. I don't support the monarchy now that the Queen has passed. But, it is a cultural thing. It is part of Canadian culture to be under the British monarchy. And, Canada has a culture of really sort of putting it in your face that you're under the British monarchy, particularly in the old days. And this is, I believe, a portrait that was once hung in a Canadian post office. So less so these days, but in the old days, you go to any sort of Canadian public building, post office, government office, school, library, anything like that, and they'd often have a big picture of the Queen. And this one you can see is obviously the Queen when she was a younger woman. And I just bought this at a thrift store. It was a real find because I feel like monarchy stuff is often snapped up pretty quickly. But I was able to get this. I don't know if with the Queen having passed, I don't know if I'm going to keep it for much longer, or what I should do with it. I don't know. It's interesting to think. What does monarchy symbolism sort of mean? What does sort of symbolism of Queen Elizabeth mean in a post-Elizabethan age? Is it going to still be something that's sort of sentimentalized? I feel like when she was alive, art like this represented, the kind of the continuity of her reign. But now that she's no longer with us, I don't know, it feels a little bit more anachronistic and kind of maybe a little bit more pointless. I'm not super sure. And of course this is a fun maple leaf clock that I bought, but has never worked. So unfortunately, it just exists as a decoration, not as something functional. Let's see if we can just do a lightning round. This is a local newspaper celebrating the healthcare workers during COVID. These are some more bead sculptures representing characters from Mario. This is from Bubble Bobble, which was another classic Nintendo game I was very fond of when I was young. This is an advertisement for the original Mario Brothers that used to be displayed on Japanese subways. This is a new driver's sign. They hang this up on the window when you're a new driver in Japan. There's an emoji of it that people often use in incorrect ways. In Great Britain, when you run for office, you wear what they call a rosette to let them know what political party you believe, what political party you support. So there's Labour, Liberal, Democrat, and Conservative, handily color-coded. Viewers from across Britain have sent these to me. And someone also sent me this one, which is from the Monster Raving Loony Party, which is Britain's most famous joke party. This is a little Pacific Northwest indigenous Christmas tree ornament made of felt. This is a bumper sticker from Colorado, a viewer sent to me. A transit pass from Chicago. This is a kabuki mask from Japan. This is a South Korean flag. I really wish I could remember the story of this. Somebody sent it to me, and it has a good story. What the text written on it represents. It's something good luck, I think, like when you're going off to do something big, your friends like sign the flag. I really apologize that I cannot remember the story behind this. If you sent this to me, let me know in the comments, or if you are familiar with Korean culture and know what that represents, let me know in the comments as well. This is just a banner saying British Columbia. This is a prayer card I got in Israel. So, you know, if you're a real hardcore Orthodox Jew, you say your little prayers before every meal, but you know, the Jewish prayers are long and convoluted, and even the most devout can't necessarily remember them. So when you go to a restaurant in Israel, they will often have one of these things on the table, and then you just, I guess if you're devout, you know which prayers to read before you eat. These are a bunch of American stickers representing the iconic American balls. I used these to inspire a video. This is the Proclamation of the Irish Republic. I bought when I was in Ireland. Very sentimentalized document signaling the beginning of Irish independence and during the Irish Civil War. The document itself, not only sentimentalized for what it says, but like the object is also very sentimentalized. You know, you buy reproductions of the original sort of printing of how it looked back in the day. This is a postcard from New Zealand, one of these traditional Chinese New Year red envelopes that people give you money in. This is Baikimon, who is a villainous character in a very popular children's franchise in Japan called Anpanman, which is so popular in that country, but like I had never heard of it before I went there. Baikimon is like a cavity, you know, because Anpanman, the characters are all like sweets, like cakes and candies and things, and so the villain is like a cavity. And the Japanese, in their culture, often depict candies, or they often depict cavities in this anthropomorphized way as these little sort of devil people who poke at your teeth with forks. I bought this in Israel as well. This is it's like a hand, God, I cannot remember what it is described as, but it's like a sort of good luck kind of charm. Very common, I think, across the Middle East, not particular to Jewish culture. I got this in Israel as well. I was in Israel during Purim, which is one of their big holidays, festivals, sort of like Halloween. And this is apparently a very sort of common noisemaker. This is also from Israel. This is a ballot. So in Israel, what is interesting is that you do not mark your own ballots. You just take a ballot from the pile. When you first go into the voting area, they have like a big box of ballots that are pre-marked, and you just find the ballot of the party that you want, and then you pick it up, and then you put it in the ballot box. So it's kind of an interesting system. This is, I believe, a ballot from one of like the hard right parties. So not necessarily a party that I personally support, but one of my viewers somehow obtained it and gave it to me. I'm sure that's violates some sort of rule. And lastly, these are two souvenirs that I bought from a local Ukrainian bakery to support the war effort, the resistance of the Ukrainian people against the invasion of Russia. You know, there's been a lot of fundraising, as I'm sure there has been in your community as well. Local Ukrainian communities, big or small, or even just allies of the Ukrainian community, allies of the Ukrainian people, have been selling all sorts of little trinkets and baubles all across this continent, little ribbons, little decals for the car or what have you. So, you know, I'm happy to show my solidarity with the Ukrainian people by buying little souvenirs. I guess every little bit counts. The remaining things on the bulletin board are pretty trivial and I don't think really worth discussing because we've talked enough in this video. So, you know, this has been a kind of cathartic experience for me, to be honest. discussing all of the stuff that has made up my backdrop for the last, couple of years. I do mix things up every so often, but it's been a pretty stable canon of objects. And sort of doing the Marie Kondo routine, I guess, where I'm sort of reflecting on each object in turn and describing to you guys what they mean to me has been good. It's been very therapeutic. So thank you for enduring this. Hopefully it's been somewhat interesting to you. Hopefully the sound quality hasn't been that bad in this newly echoey apartment. Probably some of this stuff I'll get rid of. I'll donate, and I will rebuild a new set and hopefully accumulate a bunch of new and interesting souvenirs over time that will hopefully be as beloved and iconic as this stuff was. Thank you so much for staying with this channel for however long you've been with me for, whether it's been a few weeks or a few years. It means a lot to me. Thank you so much to everybody who's ever donated anything to add to my backdrop. That means a lot to me as well. I really love being a YouTuber. I love the community that I've built. I love how intelligent and thoughtful and cultured and international my audience is. I really do think it's like one of the best audiences. No, it is the best audience on YouTube. And I'm very proud of you guys, and I'm so proud to call you guys my fans, to call you guys my community. Whenever I hang out with other YouTubers, I always feel like that my audience is better than theirs. YouTubers often complain about the qualities of their audience. It's not always the most attractive thing that YouTubers do, but I like to think that I don't do that because my audience just has so many redeeming qualities and they're just really great people. And I love that you guys have been with me for this really epic journey that I've been on. Never in a million years would I have guessed that I would somehow wind up as a professional YouTuber. When I was a kid, that wasn't even an option. And now it's what I make a living doing, making videos about stuff that I love to talk about and help educate the world in my own small way. So yeah, just thanks so much for spending time with me, and we begin a new chapter. So I'm glad you're here for it.